Hi, Rachel Roosh. This is Shane Versteg. I'm a psychotherapist and I live in Michigan. And right now I'm driving. And I want to make sure that you understand that I'm driving hands-free of the device that I'm using to interview you with today. And I don't advise that anybody films themselves while they're driving. So I'm on my way to an event, and I want to make sure that you have this today. But I wanted to answer some of your questions. Rachel, these are fantastic questions that you have about domestic violence and domestic abuse. And I wanted to kind of give you a couple of statistics about what I understand domestic abuse to be. The first of which is 85% of all people who experience domestic violence are women. Also, most people who experience domestic violence or domestic abuse are between the ages of 20 and 26 years old. And another very important fact is the unfortunate accidents, or and I say accidents not because they're true accidents, they're just reported as accidental deaths, or homicides, which are violent deaths caused by another person. More than 60% of those deaths are preceded by domestic violence, which tells me that domestic violence oftentimes leads to death. And so it's a very serious problem. It's much more serious now than it was, and we're learning that it's much more serious now than it was even 25 years ago. Those numbers have unfortunately only increased. But I wanted to give you some of those numbers because I want you to know that these are great questions that you're asking, and it's wonderful that you're learning about these things, even though it's very difficult to learn about these things and to talk about these things. So a couple of quick thoughts that I had for you as you're working through this project. It's important to tell the truth, and what I'm speaking about is if a person is seeing, if a friend is seeing abuse happen, and that could be verbal abuse, that could be physical abuse, that could be sexual abuse. I know that we don't always feel comfortable talking about that, and I understand that too. But whatever type of abusive relationship this person is in at home, and that's what domestic violence means. It means violence that's happening at home, being violated at home, which is the last place where a person should be experiencing violence, at home. It's hard enough to live in the world today and to go to school, to go out there and try your hardest in the workplace and all of that. When you come home, it should be the place where you're able to rest. You're surrounded by the people who love you the most, and you can plug into the things that you truly love, and you can unplug from the things that would otherwise cause you stress. And so the experience of domestic violence is it's very important to talk about. It's very important to think about. And when domestic violence is experienced secondhand, if domestic violence is experienced by someone who is a friend of a person who's being abused, it's very important to tell the truth, particularly if you see it 2 or 3 times when you experience that person, or when you see that person abused 2 or 3 times over the course of an amount of time. Most of the time, friends or family members, they don't say anything. And I understand that. It's most of the time the domestic life is private. Marriage is private. What happens at home is private. But if that's experienced and if that's seen by somebody, it's very important for that person who sees the abusive relationship. It's very important for that person to tell the truth. Most of the time, and I've been a psychotherapist for years, and I've very few times have I been the first person to say, hey, I think you might be experiencing an abusive relationship or domestically violent relationship. Most of the time it comes from people, best friends, trusted friends, sisters, brothers, a mom or a dad of a person in that sort of a relationship. And it's very important to tell the truth. It may not be impactful at first when if someone says, hey, I think you're in an abusive relationship, I really do, I care about you, and I know that if I didn't say anything, I wouldn't feel good about my relationship, my friendship with you. Although it may not produce fruit at first, it will cause the person to start to think about what's happening in that relationship. It'll get the wheels turning. So it's very important to tell the truth, because that's oftentimes the first point of contact of where the help can actually start. Here's the second thing that I want to share with you that really struck me when I first learned about this and when I started to see this. Over 50% of all homeless women are homeless because they have fled a domestic violence relationship. 50% of the women and their children who are on the streets of Des Moines, Iowa, Chicago, Illinois, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Detroit, Michigan, the people we see, okay, are on the street because they fled an abusive relationship in the home, and a domestic violence relationship. That's heavy to me because I see a lot of homeless people where I work, and actually now where we live in downtown Grand Rapids, we see a lot of homeless people. Most of them are males, but it just strikes me that 50% of all female homeless people, all homeless women, half of them are they're there because where they lived before was right smack dab in the middle of a domestically violent situation. And I want you to kind of keep that in mind when we kind of pass by these people whom we see every once in a while, specifically, obviously, in some of these more densely populated urban areas. Half of them, statistically, we know this, half of them are there because they stepped away from a domestic violence experience. And so our work is not done. We have plenty of work to do. We have a lot of we have a lot of things that we need to do to make sure that these women who are experiencing domestic violence and they're stepping away from these relationships, they have a place to go. And the place that they go is not the streets, not even for a day. The place they go is somewhere safer, somewhere where they can give their children a good morning, a good breakfast, somewhere where they can experience for themselves more hope than the hopelessness that comes from the experience of homelessness. So those are just a couple of ideas that I had. I'm so proud of you again, Rachel, for stepping outside of your comfort zone and thinking about and asking people questions about domestic violence. I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you again soon when we're back in Des Moines this summer.